Hey, this is Molly Patrick, and you're listening to the Clean Food, Dirty Girl podcast. We are all about helping people eat more plants and celebrating imperfection as we navigate life's messiness. Hey there, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Clean Food, Dirty Girl podcast. I have a very special guest with us today, and this is going to be a really important informational conversation. So I have Dr. Herby with me today. And Anna, you work at PCRM, which is Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And so a lot of our community and our listeners are really familiar with that awesome organization. You have a doctorate in health sciences, you are a registered dietitian, and you're a certified diabetes educator. So you have a lot of knowledge about nutrition, about plant-based nutrition, and this is sort of your wheelhouse. So I am really excited to talk with you today specifically about the updated dietary guidelines so that we can kind of work this out, talk through this, and see what we can make of it. So thank you for joining me today, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. It's really great to be here with you. I'm excited to get into it.
All right, so let's dive in. Can you just briefly talk about, or maybe not so briefly, I don't know, I'm just going to hand it over to you and ask what changed. So the guidelines recently changed. It's like February 17th as we're recording this. So it's been like a month or so since the updated guidelines came out. Can you speak a little bit about what changed?
Yeah, there's a lot of changes, so I'm glad you asked. And I think maybe one of the most important changes is the way that these guidelines were developed. The whole process is very different from what we've seen in the past. So previously, every iteration of the dietary guidelines, the government puts together this Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. And it's very transparent, and you get nominated, and it's all very public, and the public has input on their work, and they meet publicly. The meetings they have been streamed like on Zoom, so you can live stream. And this took place in 2023. In 2024, we had a really good Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. They were very balanced. And they came out with a report. They looked at all the evidence, and they put a lot of work, and they were volunteers. They came out with a Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report, and that was released at the end of 2024 for the 2025 guidelines. And what it said was a lot of good things. One of those things was to move legumes, beans, peas, and lentils to the top of the protein group, and to have dairy as an optional or water as your main beverage, instead of that little dairy cup, among other things. And so then the administration changed, as we know, and this report was kind of just set aside and not taken into account. They put together a new committee, and this was all behind closed doors, so no one really knew what was happening or who the committee was. And so this committee came up with new guidelines. And this is what we're seeing now, is just kind of this new report that came out without much public input. And we did see that that new committee had a lot of influence from the dairy and the beef and the meat industries, along with the low carb industry. And so that was very different, kind of this new surprise, we have something new. And it's not very similar to the original Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee's report. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of focus on meat and full-fat dairy, and kind of this push towards a low-carb dietary pattern, which is confusing because that's not what we've been seeing previously. It's not what the science is necessarily pointing towards. And then we also see a lot of contradictions. We see it's very confusing, right? They say limit your saturated fat to 10% of total calories, and then eat a lot of cheese and red meat. So you can't do both, right? And then we have whole grains. They talk about how good whole grains are, and yet they're at the bottom of this food pyramid, like in the smallest little section, implying that maybe you should eat less of them. So there's a lot of confusion. And I think that's one of the main takeaways, is that it's confusing. It was made in a different way than we're used to seeing, and it's not as rooted in balanced evidence as we would like it to be.
Okay. Yeah. And for people who are just seeing this, who don't have that information, they don't have that context to put it in. And so for a lot of people, they probably do see this at face value and assume like, okay, well, this is the new guidelines. It must be that something has changed in the science to back up these new guidelines. But that's not necessarily the case with these.
That's correct. Yeah, we still have the same science. We still know that eating a lot of red meat and a lot of dairy is going to set you up for heart disease, among other problems. And yeah, that hasn't changed.
Okay, so that report that was done by that sort of balanced advisory committee, does that report still exist somewhere? I mean, is that and is that something that the public can see?
Yes, absolutely. It does exist. It's long, but they also do have like a little summary showing their main points. And in fact, there's another organization, Center for Science in the Public Interest. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they took that report and created guidelines out of it, basically the dietary guidelines that would have come from that report. And that's available for the public as well. It's a really great resource.
Okay. So we'll definitely link that in the show notes so that people can check that out. I haven't seen that and I would be curious to see. I mean, I'm sure that it looks a lot different than what actually came out. So
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about, I want to talk about these like contradictions because what the guidelines are saying is no more than 10 grams of saturated fat per day. Is that right?
10% of your total
10%.
calories. So if you're on like say a standard 2000 calorie diet, that's about 200 calories or like 20-ish, 22 grams of 22 grams of saturated fat, which is not very much per day, what you should be aiming for. And if you eat even less, then of course you'd want to aim for lower than that.
Okay. And yet at the very top of the little pyramid that came out, meat is really front and center, and red meat is really glaring, and dairy as well. So I'm wondering, like, if somebody did prioritize meat and dairy for every meal, do you know roughly how much saturated fat that might be? If it was, just like a rough estimate.
You wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, you wouldn't be able to meet that 10% goal, that's for sure. So just dairy alone, like depending on what kind of dairy product it is, they do make low-fat dairy products, but the guidelines also tell us to focus on the full-fat dairy products. So if you had 3 servings of, say, regular cheese, that would probably put you at your limit of like 22 grams for the day. And then like, what about the rest of your diet, right? If you're including red meat and eggs and if you're eating those things as well, there's just no way that you're going to meet that 10% limit for sure.
Yeah, and on the pyramid itself, you don't see any percentages. You're just kind of looking at that visual. And I went to the realfood.gov website where this is, and it's not really clear. Like, it's not, I mean, not only is you have the pyramid, but then actually what the guidelines are, like, it's not presented in a very clear way. And so let's talk a little bit about let's just talk about saturated fat really quick. What is, so saturated fat, tell us why it's important to consider when consuming it.
Yeah, saturated fat, it's found in animal products mostly. It's also found in coconut oil and palm oil. And if you think about coconut oil or butter or beef tallow, for example, those things are hard at room temperature, and that's how you know it's a saturated fat. And it's not exactly like a perfect comparison, but it is hard at room temperature, and it does also become like, it kind of stiffens your arteries. It becomes hard in your body in a different way, but it does it'll accumulate inside your blood vessels along with cholesterol, and it can cause plaques, and then your whole vascular system is compromised, so it could lead to heart attacks, strokes, if you have these plaques building up in your blood vessels. So we worry about heart disease and cardiovascular disease. That's one issue. And then there's also diabetes, which we know now is not necessarily caused by eating too much sugar, as a lot of people might be led to believe, but it actually is caused by eating a lot of fat, and that fat blocks your insulin from working inside your cells. And so when insulin's not working, you've got too much fat in your cells, the sugar doesn't get into your cells. So we're also putting ourselves at risk for type 2 diabetes. And then we're also seeing a link between saturated fat and things like dementia and Alzheimer's disease, because again, that blood flow is just slowing down. And if you're getting less blood, less oxygen, less nutrients to your brain, eventually it's going to be compromised. So that's another concern. And then just the calories, eating a lot of fat, it's twice as many calories or more than twice as many calories than eating a lot of carbohydrates or even protein. So it's not a good strategy to fight obesity, or if we're worried about weight management, that's not the way to go either.
Hey there, we're going to take just a short pause because I have an announcement. So Drop It Club is our signature plant-powered weight loss program. We've been running it for about 1.5 years right now. We open the doors 4 times a year. So enrollment is just 4 times a year, and our summer enrollment just happens to be open right now. And because you are a podcast listener / watcher, we're giving you a deal. So when you use the coupon code DROPIT2026, you're going to save $40 on enrollment. So you can find the link to sign up and link to all the information in the show notes. You can read testimonials, read all about it, and then you can use that coupon code at checkout. So if you want to release weight and reach your goal weight in a way that is kind, loving, supportive, and yes, imperfect, and if you want to do this with support, with me as your coach in a group setting, and with a fantastic community of people who are doing this with you, you have got to join us. It is the most healthy, well-balanced, realistic way to release weight. And even if you don't have weight that you want to release necessarily, and you just want to get really healthy and energized and really focus on your health and your fitness, this is also a great thing to do for yourself. So I would love to be your coach. I would love for you to join us. And enrollment closes. We're only open for a couple of weeks. So be sure to sign up ASAP and use that coupon code, because the coupon code is going to expire soon. So again, you can go to dropitclub.com, or you can find the link in the show notes and then use the coupon code DROPIT2026 for $40 off. Okay, now back to the show. Yeah, so a lot of things that are not fun and really. So let's think about protein for a minute. I know that the protein recommendations went up, and yet I don't think that there's beans or legumes on this pyramid, right? Was I seeing that wrong? Are they not there?
I think they're really small. They might be at the bottom, like as a side note or something. But yeah, you're right. They're really small.
Okay, so for plant-based folks, we get our protein from plant-based sources, and beans and legumes are one of the best protein sources. And so let's talk about the increase in the protein guidelines first of all. So can you talk a little bit about what changed there?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important to know that we do have the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance or recommendation for protein, and that is 0.8 to 0.1 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That is not set in the dietary guidelines. That's another organization, and it's a very specific research done on like nitrogen balance. And so looking at how much nitrogen you're taking in, how much you're excreting, and preventing protein deficiencies, basically. And that number still stands. We still need about 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per day to make sure that we're not deficient. And that number is set a little bit high so that it works for all of the population. Like we're covering everyone in that number. The dietary guidelines, this is not that. It's just a different recommendation, and they came out with 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So almost double what the RDA is. And that research, if you look into their scientific rationale, they looked at research on athletes, first of all, and then weight loss. And the weight loss studies, the people were following a diet they were under eating calories, so they weren't meeting their calorie goals. And when you do that, you're also really at risk for under eating protein. So what they found in these studies is if you really increase, like really double down on the protein in the context of reducing your calories and not eating enough calories, then you can preserve some muscle mass and lose weight. And the reason that's important is because when you lose weight, you naturally just kind of lose muscle mass as a byproduct. It's really hard to lose weight without also losing muscle. And so preserving that muscle is important. And they showed that you can do that by basically doubling your protein intake. But that's not something that you really generalize to the whole population. Like, you can say that these people lost weight and losing weight is healthy. It can help with diabetes and heart disease, and it can reduce risk of chronic diseases. But at the same time, you can't really then go on to say like doubling your protein intake will then benefit everyone in the population, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a small, it worked for a small group of people, but we can't necessarily generalize it to everyone in the US.
Right. And the RDA hasn't changed.
Right. Yeah. The number of grams of protein you need to not be deficient in protein is still the same.
Okay. And are those guidelines set from, or is the RDA, is that a government like branch or agency that comes up with that as well, or is that another independent group?
Yeah, I had looked into, it's two groups. I think it's might be the Institute of Medicine, or it's another organization. I need to look that up. I looked it up, and then of course I forgot who makes that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is another organization within the government, I believe, that's done that research to set the RDA.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't realized that didn't change along with the dietary guidelines, right? I thought they were just kind of lumped all into one. So that's really interesting to know. So the science that is supporting the 0.8 to 1 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, that hasn't changed. And yet I think there's a lot of people right now who are like really hell bent on getting a lot more protein. I know that we see, I mean, if you are on like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, even for a minute, like you'll see people really talking about a lot of protein. And I've noticed it in the grocery stores, like, and not only like mentioning protein, but like high protein, right? There's like high protein everything now. And so I really even see it's making its way into kind of our daily lives.
Yeah, like protein water, and it's crazy. People think that eating more protein will solve everything, and it's just not the answer, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear a lot of people talking now about like if you are of a certain age and you want, like if you're, like in your late 40s, early 50s and going through perimenopause and you want to lose weight, like it's really important to like amp up your protein. And that message is like boom, boom, boom. And I think for a lot of us, if you hear it over and over again, you start thinking, well, the more, I've heard it so much, there must be something to it. And then it kind of sneaks in. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, where do we get more protein? How do we do this? And even people in the plant-based world, I get a lot of people asking us like, okay, I'm trying to get a lot more protein. How can I do it with a plant-based diet? And like, it's possible to a certain extent, but it's like, how much are you going to eat?
Exactly.
Right? Because there's a lot of really great sources, plant-based sources of protein out there. So can you just talk a little bit about that? And if there are plant-based people concerned with this, with this new kind of amping up the protein, can you just hit on that for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain contexts, like we talked about losing weight and losing muscle mass. And so if you are kind of under eating, or you're shifting your diet and you don't eat enough, then you're likely to not eat enough protein. But ideally, we want you to be eating enough. That's the goal. So if you eat more, you kind of naturally meet your protein needs. But if you are doing a lot of resistance training, or for older adults, sometimes it is helpful to bump it up a little bit, maybe to like 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per day, or whatever, like based on your calorie needs as well. And if you want to do that, then we can focus on tofu, and we can focus on beans and quinoa and a little bit of nuts and seeds. They're higher in calories, so it just depends on your goals there. But there's plenty of ways to get lots of protein. And if you just focus on those foods, and tempeh and soybeans and soy milk as well, you can include those. Try to have them in every meal, and you should be able to reach that goal. And also working with a dietitian can be really helpful if someone is concerned about how much protein they're getting and where to get it and how to balance everything in a healthy way.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for hitting on that. And again, if somebody were just looking at these guidelines, you know, the guidelines aren't going to inspire people to go buy tofu tempeh and black beans for their for their meals. It's like
Yeah.
the what struck me is that like the whole grain section is at the bottom, so it really does seem like it's saying limit your whole grains, but the whole grains guidelines didn't change. I'm gonna let my cat out really quick. If you could speak
Sure.
on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, the whole grains are confusing as well, and they do talk about fiber in the context of whole grains, which is great. And maybe we can talk more about fiber because that
Yeah.
is kind of underlooked. But they do say eat your grains as whole grains and have 2 to 4 servings, and so that's perfect. But then it's not necessarily reflected in the food pyramid, and so just another point of confusion. But we could even be eating more whole grains. Like there's no risk to eating too many whole grains, and they are really a good foundation of a healthy diet. But a few concerns. One is just fortification. Like the reason that past dietary guidelines haven't recommended 100% whole grains is because white and refined grains, like flour products, are fortified with folic acid. And that's really important for preventing neural tube defects, birth defects. And when we started that fortification, we saw a lot of great reduction in those birth defects because women don't know they're pregnant necessarily. And that's like folic acid and folate are really important in that very, very early stage of pregnancy. So we do, now that we're not including refined grains, we need to be more conscious if you are going to choose to avoid refined grains of just making sure you're getting folate through food or like food that's fortified with folic acid. And so that's just one thing to consider. And then the problem gets worse when they talk about avoiding processed foods because some processed foods like cereals have a lot of fortification as well. So there is a reason for it's not like the past dietary guidelines haven't considered that whole grains are healthy. They say half your grains should be whole grains, and then the other half can be the white grains because we're getting that folic acid.
Interesting. Okay, so that's really good to know. So what foods, if you are eating whole grains and you're not going to eat the processed fortified grains, where would one get folate?
Yeah, usually, I mean, the answer to almost every question of where do you get this nutrient is beans and leafy green vegetables.
It does seem
So
like that, yes.
yeah, that's a really good
Okay.
start. And then whole grains will have some as well, but you need to eat more. Just eating more of them will get you more of the folate.
Okay, so beans and
But
leafy greens. And if you're
yeah,
eating a well-balanced, whole food plant-based diet, really focusing on whole foods, like that's, those are two things that are in, most people's staple, most people's kitchen all the time is beans and leafy greens for people following a whole food plant-based diet. The
exactly.
rest, not so sure. But people who aren't following this way of eating are probably eating more processed stuff, which is then fortified, so you're getting those. So yeah, it's complicated. It gets complicated.
Does, yeah.
Yeah. So let's so you hit on fiber and the importance of fiber, and so I would love to chat a little bit about this and how fiber hasn't really been considered in this iteration. It hasn't been considered in previous guidelines.
I think it was the most considered in the report that came out, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Report from 2024. And
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons they recommended moving plant proteins to the top of the list of your protein sources because they do contain fiber. And they do something called food pattern modeling and looking at like how certain diets meet like each nutrient that you need to take in to be healthy. And fiber is something that we're just chronically under consuming. We never meet, like as a nation, we never meet our fiber goal basically. And so it's always a nutrient of concern and we always want to be eating more of it. And so that was mentioned in that report, but not as much in this new version. It was in the context of whole grains, but then and then we go on to emphasize like animal protein and dairy products and things that just don't have fiber in them. So it's a little bit confusing. If we're thinking about doubling our protein intake just for health reasons, then what we really should be thinking about is doubling our fiber intake because that is what the science is showing we're really lacking in. So I think it's just another
Mhm.
reason that beans should be at the top of the food pyramid if we're doing it upside down. And we should be really emphasizing those plant proteins because fiber is just something that people are not getting enough of. And it's the one thing that will make such a huge difference in everyone's health if they can eat more of that from whole plant foods.
Okay, and I want to talk about some of those the health benefits and why eating fiber is a lot of fiber is so important. But you're right. I mean, if there was as much emphasis on fiber as there was on protein, I think we would be in a lot better shape. And really, it's you don't really see a lot of people who are deficient in protein here yet. There's so much emphasis
Right.
on this, and we know that, like you said, we know that Americans are consistently really lacking in fiber. So that'd be a great focus and a good switch to, to put our energy on. So let's talk about fiber and why it's so important.
So many reasons. First of all, if you're thinking about like calories in food, having a high fiber food is going to fill you up way faster and more effectively than a low fiber food. So if you just compare beans to beef, for example, you can eat more beans and get full faster, basically for the same amount of protein and calories than if you were eating beef. And so fiber, if you think of like a plant as a person, the fiber is like your bones, basically. It's what holds up the plant. And it's something that you don't necessarily digest. So it doesn't provide calories, but it does fill up, it takes up space in your stomach. So if you eat a high fiber meal, you've got like your brown rice and your beans and your leafy green vegetables, you're going to get full faster than if you ate like a low fiber meal. You would have to eat more calories to have the same like satiety feeling and to have your stomach then tell your brain, we're good, you can stop eating now. That is all because of fiber. And so you eat fewer calories basically, and you still get the nutrients that you need on a high fiber diet. So it's easier to lose weight without counting calories, without cutting portions, without worrying about measuring things. You just have to eat the right foods. And I know you're seeing that with a lot of the people you work with, is that
Mm-hmm.
they're just freed from measuring portions and counting calories, which is really, really like changes everything.
It changes everything, especially for people who have been on diet after diet. I mean, to just be able to eat and to eat until you feel satisfied. I mean, that's a huge, yeah, it's a huge thing. And people really find, I mean, it really does change people's lives in a lot of ways. It sounds like grandiose and dramatic, but it's really true. So, okay, so
Yeah,
fiber does that. Fiber is taking up more space in your stomach. So that makes sense. Um, and
yeah,
so,
and that's
yeah.
that's just the first thing that it does, and then it's also helping to like slow down your digestion, which balances your blood sugar. So if you have type 2 diabetes, for example, then the fiber is really going to help to balance blood sugar, and to then like, and even beans, for example, if you're eating beans at lunchtime, even your blood sugar after dinner is going to be better because of that like really long term effect of the fiber in your body. So great for diabetes. And then lastly, for heart disease, it's also pulling cholesterol and toxins, extra hormones. So not limited to heart disease, but it does pull cholesterol out of your body. And so it's really good for lowering cholesterol and protecting your blood vessels by getting rid of those harmful compounds that can cause damage to your cells and your vessels.
That's so cool. It's almost like I visualize like Velcro or something, like as this going down, like having this stick to it. And yeah, the body is so awesome. And fiber,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit too about like the gut health and the microbiome and how that really and how that relationship with fiber?
Yeah, and it's funny that in the dietary guidelines, the one of the newer report, they have a little section on gut health, and they talk about the benefits of like having a healthy gut. But then they don't really emphasize fiber, as we said. So it is an opportunity there. But the gut biome is responsible for so many things, like that. The thing I just mentioned, where the beans are helping your blood sugar to be lower, like even the next day or the next meal, your microbiome is playing a role in that by releasing short chain fatty acids. So you eat fiber, which are also known as prebiotics, and they are feeding your probiotics, which are the healthy gut bacteria inside your colon and your intestines. So when your gut bacteria is happy and it's eating a lot of fiber, then it can well, the first thing that happens is that more of the good bacteria thrives and the bad bacteria kind of just dies off because it doesn't thrive on fiber. And then the second thing that happens is they then help us out by releasing short chain fatty acids. So basically compounds that our body can absorb and will send messages within our body. So one of those messages is that you'll feel full sooner. Short chain fatty acids do that. They also help talk to the liver and tell the liver to produce less cholesterol. So lots of cool things going on because of those short chain fatty acids. They're really our best friends when it comes to health, and you get them from feeding your gut bacteria healthy fiber, and they then produce those for us.
Okay, so good. Interesting. Yeah, every time I hear you speak, or when I hear anybody speak about the actual science, I'm always so happy that I eat a whole food plant-based diet. Because I know that my body just it's just such a magnificent thing to hear a bit of the mechanics about, why and how it's so important. So that was a big missed opportunity for these guidelines then to not add more about fiber, since it's so important. And it almost seems like, there's a lot of fad things going around, especially with social media, high protein is certainly one of them. And then the low carb stuff has been happening for ages and has always been really popular in its different iterations, whether that be the Atkins diet or the ketogenic diet. And I know that as the years have gone by, it seems like there's a new kind of thing that's branded, but it's all kind of that low carb. And so it seems like the guidelines are sort of a culmination of all of the fad things going around on the internet right now. And so when you they do mention something about gut health, but that's not really, incorporated much. Gut health is also a thing that a lot of people talk about right now. And so it seems like they incorporated a lot of stuff that are hot topics in nutrition. And I just have to wonder, there's so many benefits to eating a whole food plant-based diet and it's been so well researched and documented, and for a long time we've had this evidence, and it always makes me just really kind of sad that it just is, it's on the back burner, and there's not more being done with this to get this in front of the public, and then to in turn help the policy changes as well. So can you just talk a little bit about the fads and your thoughts on why a whole food plant-based diet isn't more kind of front and center in the public eye?
Yeah, it does seem like they kind of scrolled social media and they were like, oh yeah, we'll take that and we'll take that and then we'll put it into the guidelines.
This
but
influencer has a lot of followers, so yes, exactly. Sorry to interrupt, but it's like that.
Yeah.
Seems like that.
And then there's more pressure. The dietary guidelines are really meant for the public, for our public programs like SNAP and school food nutrition, and they're not meant necessarily to tell the individual exactly what to eat, because most people don't actually follow them. And so that's one problem that we have. In this case, it could be good or it could be bad. But if most people don't follow the guidelines anyway, then maybe not much will change. And most people are getting their information on social media, and on social media, we're seeing a lot of different directions, but one of those directions is plant-based nutrition. And I do feel like we're getting more traction to help people understand the benefits of plant-based nutrition through just this work on the ground and on the internet to counteract the fad diets and to provide good information that's backed by science, and to clarify the myths and to call people out on when they're making videos that are not based in science, then they're getting backlash from that, is what I'm seeing actually. Yeah. And so I think that's a good thing and a step in the right direction. But in terms of public policy, there's a lot of room for improvement there. And unfortunately, we're just seeing so much influence from right now, the dairy and the meat industries, that were they've got their people on the committee that are writing the guidelines. So I feel like that's a big part of why we're not seeing more focus on plant-based nutrition. But when you take that influence away, like in this last committee that we had, they were pretty well balanced, and they did recommend eating more plant protein and dairy being optional. And so I feel like, well, I felt like we were making progress at that point, back in 2024, until we kind of backtracked a little bit. But the science, it says what it says, and it shows that we need to be eating more fiber, more plant foods. The animal products are not helpful. We're over consuming them, and it's always going to say that. I don't see that changing. And the more we can show people that and do research on that, and people will experience the benefits, and then they experience benefits and they share it with their neighbors and their family, and it kind of spreads from there. So I feel like we're making progress, even if these guidelines don't necessarily reflect that.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I do see that on social media too. But I think it all depends on your algorithm. Right? People are going to see very different things depending on what you are looking for and what you're searching for. And I think that one of the real dangers because you're right. I mean, most people aren't like, oh, what is the government telling me to eat? I'm going to base what I'm eating on that. Like, that probably isn't very realistic. But what might happen is like, well, this influencer is now taking these guidelines and making a point to like, oh, this, carnivore bro is now saying, oh, see all this tallow and beef I've been telling you to eat. So now it's backed up with what the government is saying. So it just kind of reinforces that message. Whereas like the plant-based people are like, oh, got to debunk another one. It's like spending so much time just like, here's what the actual science says. Let's, stay focused on what the actual science says. But also a lot of people aren't reading scientific papers, and a lot of people won't be fact checking that. And, I heard you in another podcast talk about just the role of like critical thinking and how basically critical thinking can really help us right now in terms of health and nutrition. So yeah, thank you for doing what you do and for all of the whole food plant-based nutrition, or the educators out there who are grounded in the science and paying attention to the actual science. I want to talk quickly about the science that was kind of cited in there's not a lot. Like if you go to the realfood.gov website, there's not a lot of science there. Like there's a few things from what I understood, but there's not a lot. Did you see that as well, or what is your thinking about that? And then can you talk a little bit about the whole food plant-based science, and if somebody wants to dig into the science and wants to like learn more about this, what are some good resources for them?
Yes. I also, when I first looked at realfood.gov and like those basic guidelines, I was like, well, where is this reference? What are they talking about? How did they come to this conclusion? And it's kind of hard to find. You have to then go like click a link that'll take you to a PDF of their scientific foundation or the scientific rationale report. And that at the end of that, there's a ton of references. And I mean, it is referenced, but it's also a little bit, or maybe a lot, cherry picked to support like, what they wanted to come out and say. And there's some questionable studies in there, like just poor methodology and not the best research. So there are references, but it takes a lot to find them, and then to understand them, and then to understand like what the problems are with everything that they're concluding. So I understand the confusion there for sure. And in terms of where to go to find like more simplified, understandable references, I would recommend PCRM.org, the Physicians Committee. We have a lot of information on our website by health topic or by nutrient. You can search there. We also do breaking medical news. So if you go to news, I think it's one of the tabs like at the top right, and then we'll just kind of provide a 3 or 4 sentence summary of new research that comes out on nutrition. And so that's honestly great. One of the first places I go when I like need to find like what's new on diabetes or on children and dairy. Just going there for the short summary, and then the reference is at the bottom. So if you want to learn more and actually dig into the full study, you can then go to that as well. And I'm sure your listeners are familiar with nutritionfacts.org, but if not, that's another one. Dr. Michael Greger does these really short, easy to understand videos on nutrition and on research and how to understand it, and then what it means, and like the historical context as well.
Yeah. Yeah, those are two really great resources, and PCRM does a really good job of making their stuff like bite-sized and manageable and easy to navigate as well. And Dr. Greger does that as well on his site and in his books as well. So those are two really golden, really golden like resources there. And so yeah, we'll put those in the show notes as well of this episode. So if you were to take what you know about nutrition and create guidelines or to create a pyramid, what would that roughly look like for you, and what would you recommend with your wealth of background and knowledge in this topic?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, because as a team, we were kind of trying to figure out, like, can we make a better pyramid? Like, does it even exist? And I mean, I think that some of the earlier pyramid versions were fine, but I just don't think the pyramid is the right shape, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to tell like the portion sizes. And then as you go up, if it's getting smaller, like what does that actually mean? Or if you flip it upside down, what does that mean? But we do have the power plate at PCRM, and I think that's perfect. That's what when I was working with patients, that's where I would start every time, is just with the power plate, which is similar to my plate, which is what we had before this new iteration of the dietary guidelines. So you take your plate and you divide it into 4 quarters, and you have fruits and vegetables, of course, on half of your plate. So 1/4 fruits, 1/4 vegetables. And then on the other half, you have your legumes and your whole grains. And we say legumes, like, so we're talking about beans and peas and lentils and tofu instead of protein, because protein isn't really a food group, it's a nutrient. And so we do want to just like keep it to actual foods on our plate rather than talking about specific nutrients, because you can find protein in broccoli, for example, so it doesn't translate necessarily. So then we've got 1/4 legumes and then the other quarter those whole grains. And that, I think, is a good balance. Maybe not every plate looks like this, because you have your fruit as your snack or for your dessert, and then you've got like your whole grains and your beans and your vegetables for the bulk of your plate. But if you can focus on those 4 food groups, and then if you want a little bit of like flaxseed or chia seeds, a little bit of walnuts, that can go in there as well, but it shouldn't be a main, like it's not one of the core food groups, because those foods are higher in calories.
Okay, great. Yeah, that really yeah, and eating in that way, that protects us so much, and that is so good for our health, that it makes us feel, most of us feel so good. And so I really, I mean, it does. I mean, having it be like a plate too, it's just an easier visual, and it's easier to like
sense. That's how we eat.
Yeah, that's how we eat. We don't eat in a pyramid. So that, yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And again, that's probably on the PCRM website as well. So
exactly.
A lot of good information there. Is there any kind of final thoughts you have about this, or anything that you want to share about just the importance of what you're putting in your mouth as it pertains to your health and aging and all of this? I mean, is there any kind of wisdom that you want to share that we didn't cover?
Yeah, a few things came to mind. Some people might be concerned because in the dietary guidelines, there's a whole section on the vegan and vegetarian diets, and they list a lot of nutrients that you could be deficient in, including some that you'd actually get a lot more of, like magnesium and potassium, and on a plant-based diet, basically. And I just wanted to speak to like where that came from, because I don't want people to be concerned. Like there's this list of 12 nutrients I could be deficient in if I follow a vegan diet, and that's just not true. So those nutrients came from the food pattern modeling that was done with the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, like that committee that met for 2 years before these came out. And they just look at like, what nutrients do you get if you follow this pattern? What do you not get? And so they took a vegetarian pattern and they took out eggs and dairy, and they didn't replace it with anything. So it was never intended to be used as like a model of an actual vegan diet, like an actual vegan diet, you would then add in some soy products and some like fortified other foods and beans to meet that calorie goal for the day. So the diet that they were looking at, not only was it not enough calories for anyone to survive on, but it was also deficient in a ton of nutrients that you would get if you were adding back in, like if you took out dairy and you added in beans or soy milk, then you would get those nutrients, and you'd actually get more of certain nutrients than if you were on an omnivorous diet. So I just want to say the vegan diet, you're going to get all the nutrients you need. You need to take a B12 supplement in addition, but other than that, it's not something to worry about or to be super concerned with. I mean, we need to plan every diet. We need to be thinking about having a balanced diet no matter what, if you're omnivore, if you're vegan, or if you're vegetarian.
Right.
But that kind of fear, I don't want people to feel scared when they read that.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that and I was like, oh, this sounds really bad. Like I know it's not true, but if I didn't know it, it would be really like scary.
Exactly.
Like, oh, it's almost like a cautionary tale against eating like this. You know, you better go up to have your meat. And so it's really good that you pointed that out. And and I guess no matter what way you're eating, you have to eat enough calories or else you're going to be deficient in things. I mean, this is not
exactly. Yeah.
No matter how you're eating. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that. So that came out of the guide, some of the work that was produced by that, not the committee that came up with the new ones, but the ones from 2024 that were pretty balanced.
It did come out of that, but it wasn't intended to be used in the way that it was now being used.
They picked the wrong part of their stuff, basically.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's so true.
Yes. Dang it. Well, I feel for those people who did all that work, that must have been pretty, that must have been kind of a blow to have their work not implemented in any way, because it sounds like they spent a lot of time developing that.
Yeah, and they were volunteers, and they did spend a ton of time and a ton of work and a ton of thought that went into making that report.
Yeah, that's really too bad. That must have been a hard blow, especially when you think you're, doing work that's going to make a bit of difference, for so long, and then just to have it not, or I guess the part that was used wasn't intended to be used. So, damn. I want to talk. You talked about this briefly, and I just want to touch on this one bit. So, the advisors that were picked did have ties to the meat and dairy industry. Now, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I from what I understand, that's not uncommon. And committees or advisory boards in the past have had ties to those industries, but not to the extent that they have now. Can you touch on that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, because this used to be more common, like back before the 2000 dietary guidelines were issued. We did see a lot of ties to food industry. I think there were 6 out of 11 advisory committee members in that like pre-2000 committee that had connections to meat, dairy, or egg industries. And so the Physicians Committee actually sued under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Freedom of Information Act. And they were successful, which is awesome. And ever since then, like slowly but surely, the committees have gotten more balanced. And we're not saying that like no one has any ties to any food industry, but what balanced means is that maybe like one person has a few ties over here, one person like has the opposite kind of influence, and then there's a lot of neutral people, and basically it's not like leaning one way or the other. And we really saw that in this last committee that worked so hard for the 2024 report. They were very balanced and very transparent. And so things have just been getting better and better every 5 years that we do this. And then now we're just back 20 years, basically, to early 2000s with, there were 9 people on this committee that wrote the report, and at least 8 of them have some sort of tie to like either the low carb industry or in the past they've been paid by the Cattlemen's Beef Association or the dairy industry. And even if they don't have any like clear financial ties, they kind of run in circles, that they work with other authors, like co-authors that have written like pro meat, pro dairy research, etc. so yeah, we were really seeing there's just no balance, no neutrality in this group of scientists, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's and that is a change because there's like precedent because there was a lawsuit that PCRM did bring about and won. I mean, is that something that can happen again?
Technically, yes. So we did file a petition, just like an official complaint saying like this is against the law, basically. And so as far as I know, there's been no response to that. And then the next step would be to file a lawsuit and see if we can get it changed. But it's a very slow process, and so fingers crossed we can get somewhere with it. But I think that pursuing other, just like getting the right information out there is the most important thing that we're focusing on right now, so that people are not confused.
Yeah.
And hopefully the next guidelines that come out will be much more clear and science-based.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fighting the good fight. I mean,
Exactly.
I think I did want to just circle back quickly to the thing, something that you mentioned, like it is really one of those things where, you have one person at the office who changed how they ate, and the person sitting next to them at work has noticed that they have more energy and are generally happier, and they're, look radiant, and so they might share what they're doing, or somebody's sister or aunt, and that's certainly what we've seen in our community. It's something that just kind of spreads, and it happens on the ground. And so much of the work that people are doing right now are really on the ground, and it's because there's a lot of very passionate people who know the power of this. And so I just want to thank you for your work, and for not giving up, and for fighting the good fight, and for getting the good information out there, and doing stuff like this and all of the work that you do. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today, and diving into this and making some sense of it.
Yeah, well, same to you. I know you're doing all the same work in a different kind of way with all the practical tools. So it takes a village for sure.
It does. Yeah. It does, because getting the information out there is one thing, and then, okay, well, what do I eat? That's sort of where we come in. Eat this. It's delicious.
Yeah, what's for dinner?
Yeah, this is what you're having for breakfast. And it's that practical stuff, because all of this can be very in theory it's one thing, but actually putting it into use, that's, getting those plants in your mouth is the thing that's going to help the most. But it's a long way for a lot of people to get to that point. So yeah, it does take a village, that's for sure. So, well, thank you, Dr. Herby. Yeah. I appreciate your expertise and for sharing your time today. I learned a lot, and I know the community will love it. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Molly. It's been fun.
Yay. Did you know that Clean Food Dirty Girl has a club? We do. It's called the Clean Food Dirty Girl Meal Plan Club. And if you want to eat more plant-based meals that are delicious, that are damn good, that will have you craving them, if you want to feel energized and healthy from head to toe, if you want to save time in the kitchen each week, if you want to use all of the groceries that you actually buy, and if you want the omnivores in your life to say, yum, to the plant-based meals that you're cooking, you have got to join us. Go to cleanfooddirtygirl.com, and on the homepage you can find out more. I would love to see you in the club. It is the best. Come find out what all the buzz is about. It is life-changing, and I would love to have you. Thank you for listening to this podcast and for being in our sphere. If you can rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to them, that would be badass. Thank you so much for spreading the dirty love.